Don King promoted Muhammad Ali, George Foreman, and Mike Tyson. He made himself richer than all three. Every single one of them eventually sued him. And every single one kept coming back. How does a man build an empire by taking money from the most powerful athletes on earth, and still convince them to sign the next contract? How does someone charged with killing two men become the most recognizable face in boxing? The answer isn't just about manipulation. It's about understanding human nature at a level most people never reach. Don King didn't just promote fights. He weaponized charisma, turned loyalty into a transaction, and proved that in America, the story you tell matters more than the truth. This is how he rose. This is how he fell. And this is why, decades later, his name still means something. Donald King was born August 20, 1931, in Cleveland, Ohio. His father died in a steel mill accident when Don was 10. His mother, Hattie, cleaned houses and took in laundry to feed 6 children in a 2-room apartment on the east side. There was no margin for error. No safety net. Just survival. Don learned early that the world didn't hand you anything. You took it. By his teens, he was running numbers, the illegal lottery that funded black neighborhoods when banks wouldn't. He wasn't just a runner. He was good at it. Charismatic. Fearless. By the 1950s, Don King controlled his own operation. He drove a Cadillac. He wore custom suits. He carried cash in rubber-banded stacks. The numbers racket was Cleveland's shadow economy, and King was a kingpin before he turned 30. He understood leverage. He understood fear. And he understood that in a world that refused to give black men legitimate power, you built your own system. But the streets had rules. In 1954, King shot a man named Hillary Brown in the back during a robbery attempt. He claimed self-defense. The case was ruled justifiable homicide. He walked. 13 years later, in 1967, King stomped an employee named Sam Garrett to death on a Cleveland sidewalk over a $600 debt. This time, there were witnesses. This time, he couldn't walk away. King was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to Marion Correctional Institution. He served 3 years and 11 months. In prison, Don King read Shakespeare, Machiavelli, American history. He studied how power moved through language. How men who controlled the narrative controlled the world. When he walked out in 1971, he wasn't just a street hustler anymore. He was a man with a plan. Don King got out of prison in 1971 with no money and a murder conviction. Most ex-cons disappear. King walked straight into the spotlight. He started promoting local boxing matches in Cleveland, small club fights, charity events, anything that put him near the ring. Boxing was a cash business. It was corrupt. It was segregated. And it was run by men who looked exactly like the ones who'd kept King out of legitimate business his entire life. He saw an opening. In 1972, King convinced Cleveland to let him promote a charity exhibition for a local hospital. The headliner, Muhammad Ali. It was absurd. King had no track record. No connections. No credibility. But he had a gift, he could talk. He walked into Ali's camp and pitched a vision. Not a fight. A cause. Ali, always drawn to black empowerment and spectacle, said yes. The event was a success. More importantly, Ali remembered the name Don King. King understood something the old guard didn't: boxing wasn't just about fights. It was about story. It was about making people feel something. And in the 1970s, with Ali as the most famous athlete on earth, the story was everything. In 1974, King pulled off the impossible. He secured $10 million, a record-breaking sum, to stage a heavyweight championship fight between Ali and George Foreman in Kinshasa, Zaire. The money came from Zaire's dictator, Mobutu Sese Seko, who wanted to rebrand his regime. King sold it as history, two black champions fighting on African soil, broadcast worldwide. He called it, the Rumble in the Jungle. The fight became the most watched sporting event in history. Ali won. King won bigger. He walked away with a reputation as the man who could make the impossible happen. Foreman and Ali both made millions. They both also started noticing discrepancies in the accounting. But by then, King had moved on. He had what he wanted, access to every major fighter in the world. And he wasn't giving it back. By the late 1970s, Don King Productions was the most powerful promotional company in boxing. King promoted Ali's final fights. He controlled Larry Holmes, the new heavyweight champion. He staged The Thrilla in Manila, one of the most brutal and iconic fights ever filmed. His signature look, the electrified hair, the sequin jackets, the American flag pins, made him more recognizable than most of the fighters. He was a character. A brand. A spectacle. And beneath the showmanship was a ruthlessly efficient business model. King signed fighters to long-term exclusive contracts. He controlled the promotion, the venue, the broadcast rights, and the sponsorships. He paid fighters a purse, often a large one, but kept the ancillary revenue. Merchandise. Foreign rights. Closed-circuit TV. The money that actually mattered. Fighters saw the big check and signed. They didn't read the fine print. Or if they did, they didn't understand it. King did. He built a machine that extracted wealth from the athletes who generated it and funneled it to himself. And the fighters kept coming back. Why? Because King delivered what no one else could, the biggest stage. He could get you on national television. He could get you a title shot. He could make you famous. Larry Holmes later said King stole millions from him. He also admitted that without King, he might never have become champion. It was a devil's bargain, and every fighter knew it. But in boxing, you don't get a second chance. You fight while you can. And if Don King is the gatekeeper, you shake his hand and sign the paper. King also cultivated relationships with the sanctioning bodies, the WBC, WBA, IBF, that controlled championship belts. He paid sanctioning fees. He flew officials to fights. He made himself indispensable. If you wanted a title shot, you went through King. If you wanted a unification bout, you went through King. He didn't own boxing. He didn't need to. He owned the checkpoints. And that was enough. In 1985, a 19-year-old kid from Brooklyn named Mike Tyson exploded onto the boxing scene. He was raw, terrifying, and fast-tracked for greatness by his trainer, Cus D'Amato. D'Amato distrusted promoters. He especially distrusted Don King. He warned Tyson, stay away from King. No matter what. Cus D'Amato died in 1985. Within 2 years, Mike Tyson signed with Don King. King did what he always did. He got close. He talked about black empowerment. He talked about legacy. He talked about making Tyson the richest fighter in history. Tyson, grieving and surrounded by people who wanted a piece of him, believed the pitch. In 1988, Tyson became the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. He was the most famous athlete on the planet. And Don King promoted every major fight. Tyson earned tens of millions per bout. King earned more. But Tyson started noticing the same thing Ali and Foreman had noticed: the money didn't add up. In 1998, Tyson sued King for $100 million, claiming fraud and breach of contract. The lawsuit detailed years of financial manipulation, hidden payments, inflated expenses, side deals that funneled Tyson's earnings into King's pockets. The case was settled out of court for $14 million. Tyson later said King stole $50 million from him, maybe more. He also said King was a reptilian motherfucker who belonged in jail. And yet, for years, Tyson kept fighting on King undercards. Because King still controlled the heavyweight division. Because King could still get him a payday. Because in boxing, you fight while you can, and you take the deal in front of you. That was King's genius. He didn't need to be loved. He just needed to be necessary. By the 1990s, King's model was under attack. Fighters were wising up. Lawyers were circling. The FBI launched multiple investigations into King's business practices, allegations of bribing officials, manipulating rankings, intimidating rivals. Nothing stuck. King had the best lawyers money could buy. And he had a public persona that made him seem larger than the accusations. He was Don King. The hair. The flag. The hype man. How do you take down a cartoon character? The lawsuits came in waves. Larry Holmes sued King in 1992, claiming he was cheated out of millions. The case settled. Muhammad Ali sued King in 1982 over underpayment for the Thrilla in Manila and other fights. Settled. Terry Norris sued. Tim Witherspoon sued. Julio Cesar Chavez sued. Every major fighter King ever promoted eventually took him to court. Most settled. Some won. None of them got everything they were owed. King's strategy was delay, obfuscate, and outlast. He had infinite resources and infinite patience. Fighters had neither. They needed the money now. They needed to move on. King knew that. He built his empire on that knowledge. In 1997, the U.S. Attorney's Office filed wire fraud charges against King, alleging he had manipulated fighter rankings and bribed officials to secure title shots. It was the closest anyone had come to putting King in prison since 1967. The case went to trial in 1998. King's defense was simple: everyone in boxing was corrupt. Singling him out was selective prosecution. The jury deadlocked. The charges were dropped. King walked out of the courthouse, raised his fists, and declared victory. He was untouchable. But the sport was changing. Cable networks started promoting their own fights. Fighters began hiring real managers and lawyers. Oscar de la Hoya built his own promotional company. Lennox Lewis avoided King entirely. The monopoly was breaking. And King, now in his 60s, was losing his grip. The heavyweight division splintered. The alphabet soup of sanctioning bodies, WBA, WBC, IBF, WBO, diluted the meaning of champion. There was no single star, no single fight, no single promoter who mattered. King still promoted fights. He still wore the jackets. But the power was gone. In 2004, Mike Tyson fought his final bout, a sad, one-sided loss to Danny Williams in Louisville. King wasn't involved. Tyson retired broke, battered, and talking openly about how King had destroyed him financially. King's response: "I made Mike Tyson. Without me, he'd be nobody." It was vintage King, shameless, technically true, and morally bankrupt. The question wasn't whether King had taken money. Everyone knew he had. The question was whether he believed he'd earned it. By the 2000s, Don King was a relic. He still promoted small fights. He still showed up at press conferences, hair untamed, voice booming. But the sport had moved on. The major networks weren't interested. The major fighters didn't need him. And the public had stopped pretending he was anything other than what he was, a brilliant, ruthless con man who built an empire on exploitation. In 2005, a wrongful death lawsuit filed by the family of boxer Julio Cesar Chavez alleged that King's promotional practices contributed to unsafe fight conditions. The case was settled quietly. In 2009, King was sued again, this time by former light heavyweight champion Graciano Racajani, who claimed King had sabotaged his career. Racajani won a $46 million judgment. King appealed for years. He never paid. The lawsuits kept coming. The allegations never changed. And King never admitted wrongdoing. Not once. He maintained, until the end, that he was a victim of racism, of jealousy, of a system that couldn't accept a black man with power. There was truth in that. The boxing establishment had tried to shut King out for decades. The FBI had targeted him with an intensity rarely seen for white-collar crime. But the truth was also that King had cheated everyone he'd ever worked with. He'd stolen from fighters who trusted him. He'd manipulated men who had no other options. And he'd done it all with a smile. King's last major promotion was in 2016, a small card in Florida that barely drew an audience. He was 85 years old. The hair was still there. The voice was still there. But the fighters weren't. The money wasn't. The relevance wasn't. Don King had outlived his own empire. He made hundreds of millions of dollars. He promoted the most famous fights in history. He worked with the greatest athletes of a generation. And every single one of them walked away hating him. In 2024, Don King is still alive. He's 93. He gives occasional interviews. He still defends his legacy. He still claims he was the greatest promoter who ever lived. And in a sense, he's right. No one else could have done what he did. No one else would have tried. Don King's story is not a morality tale. It's a power study. He rose from a Cleveland numbers racket to the center of the global sports industry. He promoted Ali, Foreman, Tyson, names that will echo long after King is forgotten. He made himself richer than all of them. And he did it by understanding one thing better than anyone else: people will tolerate almost anything if you make them feel special. King didn't just sell fights. He sold belonging. He sold history. He sold the idea that you were part of something larger. And while you were feeling that, he was taking your money. The lesson isn't that charisma is dangerous. It's that charisma without conscience is unstoppable, until it isn't. King's empire collapsed not because someone beat him, but because the system evolved past him. Fighters got smarter. Contracts got tighter. The leverage shifted. But for 30 years, Don King was the most powerful man in boxing. And he did it by being exactly what he always was, a hustler from Cleveland who read Machiavelli in prison and decided the world was his con. Every fighter who sued him was right. Every dollar they claimed he stole, he probably took. And yet, they kept coming back. Because King delivered what no one else could, the chance to be great. That's the trade-off. That's the trap. And that's the legacy. Don King proved that in America, the story you tell matters more than the truth. That manipulation at scale requires genuine brilliance. That you can commit every sin in the book and still die rich, famous, and unapologetic. He made boxing millions. He made himself more. And when the fighters finally walked away, broke and bitter, King just found new ones. That's not a villain. That's not a hero. That's something else entirely. That's Don King.